In the last episode, we talked about the difference between stable and being resilient. Today, I want to go one step deeper because once people understand that difference, the next question usually is, so where does vulnerability actually come from? Now, I'm not speaking about the fear based type of vulnerability, but the quiet kind that builds underneath otherwise good plans. Hi, I'm Tennille Alonzo, and on this episode of Retire Smart, the uninitiated guide, I'll be discussing the topic where income vulnerability actually comes from. When people hear the word income or income vulnerability, they often assume it's about irresponsibility, poor decisions, lack of discipline, or not planning. But in my experience, income vulnerability often shows up in people who are doing many right things. Income vulnerability isn't about what you're doing wrong, it really is about that hidden exposure. Assumptions that quietly sit under your plan, untested, unquestioned, and rarely discussed. Most people don't see vulnerability until something breaks. And I would like you to take some notes because what I'm about to do is discuss some of the most common sources of income vulnerability. And the first most common source is income concentration. When most or all of our income comes from one source, that is called income concentration. Now, that source might feel secure. It might even be a high paying source. But concentration creates exposure when conditions change. I've heard this sentence many times. It was a good job, stable employer, solid role, strong track record. Then something shifted. Maybe it was a restructuring, policy changes, health, or timing. The income didn't disappear forever though, but it paused long enough to create some stress. Not because the person failed, but because everything depended on that one stream. Research across multiple markets show that most income disruptions are temporary, but temporary doesn't mean harmless. Even short interruptions can trigger things like paused contributions, debt reliance, and pressure based decisions. Vulnerability isn't about permanence, but it's about timing. Another major source of income vulnerability is time dependence. You see, savings assume time continues, time to earn, time to recover, time to rebuild. When income, of course, changes, time becomes compressed, and plans that looked fine on paper suddenly feel fragile. I've watched people say things like, Tennille, I'll just catch up later. And sometimes they do, but sometimes life just adds another layer, a second disruption, a new responsibility, rising costs. And the time they thought they had quietly disappears. Vulnerability shows up when plans depend on ideal timelines. A third source of income vulnerability is protection gaps. Now, this is not just having insurance, but whether it actually matches income realities. When insurance or income protection is unclear, insufficient, or misunderstood, income disruptions turn into financial stress very, very quickly. Another often overlooked source of vulnerability is dependency. Things like family members, children, aging parents, even employees or business partners. Income vulnerability increases when more people rely on your earnings, especially if that reliance isn't planned for specifically. These risks rarely show up alone. So think about it: income concentration plus time dependence, protection gaps plus dependency. On their own, each feels manageable, but together they compound. That's how people feel blindsided, not because they ignored reality, but because no one helped them see the full picture. Income vulnerability isn't a judgment, it's information. Seeing exposure doesn't mean you failed, it means you're finally looking at the structure beneath the surface. When income vulnerability isn't addressed, retirement plans don't collapse, they drift. Delays accumulate, confidence erodes, options narrow. Over time, people don't feel behind because they didn't care. They feel behind because exposure was never clarified. Before resilience can be built, clarity has to come first. Not urgency, not fear, just honest visibility into where vulnerability exists. You can't strengthen what you haven't seen yet, how can you? And that's what this year is about. Clarity before action, design before pressure. I'm Tennille Alonzo. This is Retire Smart, the uninitiated guide, and 2026 is our year of resilience. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.